folks, this is Dylan and Raphael here again to talk to you about the wonderful world of finance and risk and how it is changing. I am particularly excited about this month's topic because I know almost nothing about it, and so I really hope to learn something. For all you finance people, I'm gonna back it up and help explain where we're going to go to. You can tune out a little bit. In a finance department, you got some operational departments like people who pay the bills, people who send the bills. You got some auditors maybe. You got some controllers, and then there's this mysterious department called FP&A, and
it's the acronym that's mysterious.
Yeah, it's even a mysterious acronym. It never gets spelled out on an org chart. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do you consider risk in a nuanced or even a appropriate way these days when you're doing financial projections and finance strategy? Are you ready, Raphael? Did I say anything?
No, I don't think so.
Not yet. All right. Well, start us off. What is FP&A, and paint us a picture of how it's been done for a while.
Right. So FP&A, first off, it stands for Financial Planning and Analysis. So the name, the description really is in the name, but obviously using the acronym, it sounds mysterious. Essentially, it's doing financial analysis of a business, trying to understand what's going on in the company, and then afterwards using that for planning strategic purposes. How it was done before, I would say that it was a lot of sort of backward looking. And when I say backward, I mean sort of looking at the past rather than sort of literally backwards. Looking sort of analysis, trying to use so basically tracking performance over time, looking at sort of historical performance and data. A lot of top-down analysis, so trying to define strategy from the top down without really looking at how it's implemented from the bottom up. So it's an evolution also in management style. A lot of sort of spreadsheet analysis, sort of huge spreadsheets of information, monthly and quarterly reporting, budgeting, sort of often fixed budgeting. Actually, that's something that's relatively new, is the approach of using rolling forecasts. And one of the big problems actually in it is the lack of communication. So there's generally a culture of siloing off teams, I think, in sort of historically, and so FP&A was completely separate from most other departments, which means that it didn't really talk to anyone else, which meant that it was essentially creating forecasts in a bubble. So there's a question of how efficient and effective it was. And that's shifted a lot. There's been a big evolution, I think, technology driven and also management style driven, culture driven, to move towards a more integrated approach using improved analysis tools. Does that cover everything?
Yeah, that's good. So I'm gonna just jump in with some of my baggage. When I hear
Sure.
that team, yes, I think of a shining city on a hill. I think of an ivory tower of people who don't understand the natural dependencies between teams and departments. How it might look from a high level view like this team is doing nothing, but they're enabling maybe success, highly scalable success on which other teams, important teams, are counting on. I also think of cost takeouts, right? This team is infamous for like capital planning and the kind of rigmarole that goes along with that, trying to get funding for your project. I don't know. It seems like an out of touch department. Am
Well, it
I
shouldn't be.
doing it a disservice?
Well, you might be painting a picture of reality in many places, to many companies, but it shouldn't be. FP&A should be, at least in my opinion, it should be the glue that holds sort of top level decision making management with operations. Because essentially, what it should be doing is taking all the information and data from an operational perspective, connecting that to finance, and then creating a picture that decision makers can use to then drive strategy. So it should really be the glue that binds everyone together, not sort of the castle on a hill, city on a hill, uh, sort of vision. At least that's my take on it. I think it's a very important department to have in a company, because without it, you have less efficient strategy. Strategy won't be connected to reality. It wouldn't be connected to finance and operations, and it will end up being management saying we want to reach this goal without any real understanding of whether it's feasible or achievable, or even how to implement it. It would just be and that's what it was historically. Was we want to reach this amount of revenue by next quarter or the quarter after, and then it's someone else's problem to work out how to do it. Whereas FP&A should be driving how to do that. It should be saying, okay, this is a bottom up data that drives top down decision making, and if you want to do this from the top down, then this is what needs to happen from the bottom up.
So I think you're betraying a deep maverick personality here in this, and getting us to the end. You keep saying data. The FP&A
Yes.
team is going to be helping advise decision makers using data, and
Yes.
you're not saying money and accounting sheets and OI and EBITDAs. You're saying
Because
data.
that is all data. Data is all that plus more stuff.
Right. So I guess I'm gonna pin you against the wall here. Do
Go
you
on.
feel like the FP&A team is moving into like business wide KPI RKO management or leadership? Like they not
It
only do
should
they
be.
own the finance planning, but they own the metrics planning.
Well, it should be. It just depends on the organization. It depends on the structure. And it depends on the culture of the organization and who's making the decisions about all that at the top. But what I was expressing was what I think it should be rather than what it is. Because it's definitely not homogenous across every company in the world. And it's definitely something that is evolving over time as workplace culture, teams, management styles, technology evolves. We as individuals haven't really. I don't think we've changed very much from a personality or behavioral perspective over the last 50 years or so. Humanity hasn't evolved that way, but the tools that we have and the thought processes that we have evolved, and so we use those in different, hopefully better ways.
Mm-hmm. I'm withholding on. We both want to jump into like, well, how is it different now? But I want to jump back to something you said about how it has previously been done. It's been
Yeah.
retrospective. It's been based on data to this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the obvious way to do it. I would say for anyone starting up a
To be honest, that's how
financial
it's
analysis.
done in many regards. That's how it's still done. It depends really on the person. So even so, if you're looking forward, you're still using historical data. But what I meant by that is that it's more this is how we performed. These are the KPIs of our performance in the last quarter, last year, whatever. And so we want to maintain that, improve that, or whatever. It's not assuming, or these are what we would plan to do, and therefore this is what might evolve over time. So an example of that could be, for example, a company is about to release a new part of, or there's a software company, they're releasing additional functions in their product, and so they're hoping that that's going to improve customer retention, for example, or reduce the cost of acquisition because it answers a pain point that people have expressed. Historically, that might not have been factored in because they weren't looking at operations and they weren't talking to the tech people who, when they were sort of developing and releasing new features to the product. So they'd have just said, okay, this is what the KPIs are of the last quarter of the last year. This is what we expect for the next quarter, next year, and so on. And I think that has evolved, or should evolve, so that FP&A is talking to all the different teams and getting all that information. At least in my experience of the companies that I've worked with, most of them, they are moving in that direction. But again, most of the companies I've worked with in the last 5 years have all been sort of smaller companies, I'd say, so in the 300 employees maximum down to sort of 10, 15. So it's not corporates, it's not enterprise. And in those environments, I've definitely seen a lot more siloing off. But again, that's like 5 to 15 years ago.
When I think of retrospective performance analysis, that seems like it would work best for an organization that is not changing fast. I'm thinking of manufacturing.
Right.
I'm thinking of, I don't know, agriculture or something where it's fairly dependable. At least the risk profile and the business strategy is not
I would
changing.
argue that those are changing. I mean, manufacturing, look at supply chain challenges, look at changing demand, changing marketing approaches, sales cycles, logistical challenges, volatility in commodities. All those could be have got sort of create volatility in that market. And if you go to farming, then you got all that plus climate change. You got, shifting erosion of nutrients in the soil. You've got, and then after there's also the technological aspects. There's huge innovations in technology across the board. So, I mean, farming even 10 years ago compared to farming today is radically different. I don't think any company should really think. Well, I can't even think of any real examples where sort of the status quo is sort of a safe place to be. And even in something as you'd say unchanging as mining, it isn't unchanging. There's huge innovations in the mining industry. There's huge innovations in using remote controlled robots as diggers. And even, the refining process probably hasn't changed a huge amount. I'm a little bit out of sync on that one, but I know that sort of workforce challenges have forced the mining industry to innovate in terms of, and especially from a safety perspective, innovate on how they conduct their processes. So there's constant change in every industry, and every industry has to remain cognizant of change and adapt to it. Otherwise, it's going to fall behind all its competitors. Every company in every industry, I should say.
All right, let me try again. When I think of the 80s, and I think of, like, I guess kind of, I'm making up a time when this retrospective picture of success and informing strategy was effective. I'm thinking of Sears. In America.
I mean, the company Sears, or is
the company Sears.
Yeah.
It was very predictable. It had a very steady approach. I think of Toyota.
Sure.
Toyota had a very steady approach. It got really amazing, but that was through iterative cost takeouts, waste takeouts, shortening lead times.
Yeah, I think they were
business
Weren't they
model.
the innovators of lean or theory of constraints? Was
Yes,
it Toyota? I think it was
but
Toyota, wasn't it?
yeah,
Was it Suzuki? It was one of the
well,
car companies, I
well,
think.
they're all friends,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
yes, they were, but it was a 40-year process.
Hmm.
Like they came up from behind. They were the dark horse
Hmm.
in manufacturing, and then took the world by storm because they were suddenly in the front
Yeah,
in the 80s
yeah.
in terms of like value proposition to consumers.
Hmm.
And that's why we all like got Japan crazy in business. But when I think about businesses today, this is what
Hmm.
you were just saying. I don't think even Toyota anymore
No,
can have that consistency of
I don't think it could
that
exist anymore.
predictability of a business model
No,
decade
no,
over decade, like they did from the 50s
definitely
through
not.
the 80s.
Definitely not. I'd say even a 5 year window is too difficult these days. Things are just changing too quickly. Well, too quickly. Things are
Uh-huh.
changing very quickly. I think ever since the sort of commercialization of the internet, things have changed exponentially rapidly, and it's going to get even faster with AI. And I don't
Sure.
think any company can really sort of innovate to a certain point and then rest on its laurels for 10 years or 20 years or 40 years. It
Sure.
just doesn't exist anymore, that kind of model. We live in a far too volatile world. And it's not just to do with innovation, it's also to do with, I think we even mentioned it in our last sort of webinar, that sort of communication has become so fast today, and the world has become so interconnected that things
Yeah.
that you would never expect to connect or to impact each other are. And and that means that the world is increasingly uncertain, increasingly risky in a sense, and people have to be constantly aware and reactive to it, but hopefully, as we talk about in risk, proactive, in as much as you
Sure.
can be. So yeah, I just don't think that model exists anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I mean, here in the United States, Sears has become an icon of a defunct, derelict, bygone era. You see
Mm,
these shuttered Sears big box stores with cracked pavement in front
mm,
and grass growing. It's like a, I don't know, returning to nature. Sears has
well,
hit its zenith and is now being absorbed back into the earth. And
it's a
I
dire
feel
picture.
like it evokes strong feelings for a lot of people, especially those who are around in Sears heyday, because
Yeah.
they were huge. Everybody wanted to be Sears
Mm,
for there for a couple decades in the 70s and the
hmm.
60s. And you're right, the world is changing.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Reeling it back
tell
to
us
FBA.
how. Yeah, back to FP&A. Okay, so what is, say, okay, you had said that most organizations are still doing planning this way. They look at last year, they look at the year before,
Yeah.
and they project based
Yeah.
on previous year performance.
Yeah. Ironically, it's almost
What's
gone.
how for the people still living in that world,
Hmm.
make paint us a vision of how it could work differently. Make it real.
So I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about teams not being so siloed. If you know that things are in the pipeline in another department, and you think, okay, maybe I should factor that in because I know it's going to happen. And once you start thinking in that approach, then you start thinking, okay, if that's going to happen, then that's going to happen, then that's going to happen. You start thinking in a more forward-looking view. what I was going to say though is that ironically, I think sort of the advent of big data is kind of pushing us back into this sort of retroactive view, because big data modeling, at least my understanding of it, is very much let's look at the sea of historical data and use that to forecast forward, assuming that everything stays the same. Now, I'm probably oversimplifying it massively, but that's this is coming from my education being sort of just before the advent of big data, and sort of not only dipping my toes into it, but that's the sense that I have, is that it's less about sort of business intelligence modeling and more about using big data to find patterns and then forecast those patterns. And I have seen that even lately. Worked on a couple of projects that were sort of very much big data driven, and the only real approach to do it is that way, because there's so much data. It's difficult to create and to do more than take the highest level information forward in complex calculations. For me, the art of FP&A is to identify what is the relevant data and use that to build more complex, sophisticated models that are sort of combinations of top-down and bottom-up modeling, using logic and rationale rather than pattern recognition. And we've kind of like, there was a peak of that, I feel, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. At least that's when I was sort of studying and starting out my career. And then it's come back the other way because of big data, and I'm still trying to use that. And there are companies that still, many companies still do, sort of look for and use that approach, but the big data, like a lot of people sort of, big data is the sexy word that everyone wants to go with. And so it's kind of sort of trending back in that direction. But I think it needs some kind of balance between the two. I always say one extreme or the other is never good. You need to have some kind of balance of the two, finding what is the appropriate method or the appropriate data, the appropriate forecast given the context. Ironically, and this is not a political jab, context is important everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you're going to be using newer tools.
Yes.
Maybe the data is going to get to you faster. Maybe you have existing models to respond to changes faster. Like, I'm imagining, feels like back in the day, strategy was decided quarterly. Like, you'd get the quarterly sales numbers and you'd say, should we keep the course? Should we keep the same ad numbers? And now you have a steady stream of, like, what's the click rate on the website? Day to day, hour to hour.
Minute to minute, sometimes it depends on the. So especially in sort of trading platforms and stuff like that, it can be even faster than that. But also, it's interesting that you mentioned those examples of sort of the quarterly numbers for sales and so on, because when I think strategy, I think more, when is the right time to release a product? Should we be expanding into this territory? Should we be raising capital now for the next thing, or should we wait until we've got our own revenue, our own savings to be able to finance something? Are we missing the boat? So I think even what would be classified as strategy has probably evolved to some degree.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly an association of long-term thinking with strategy, right? You got strategy and you got tactics, or some would say execution, and strategy is certainly the more glamorous of the two. But I guess, maybe I'm seeing the same thing, a convergence of those two worlds where you can and do make strategic changes quickly when you need to. And the first step is having data and information you can depend on. And the faster you have it, the faster you can
and it increases your resilience as a business as well, because the more data you have, the more informed you can be, and the faster you iterate that data and review it, the faster you can pivot or adjust to new perspectives, new changes in the world.
Right.
Resilience is also a big topic in risk management, where you're sort of trying to make sure that a business is sort of, well, I can't think of another word, but resilient to change.
Sure.
Sort of bends and flexes with something, but it comes back to the status of where it was before, or sort of to the changes to the new reality. And you can only do that in a volatile world by being reactive, or having fast iterations of data
Uh,
changes, which means having flexible modeling that can adjust to new changes very quickly, reviewing it more often than on a quarterly basis, updating the data regularly, having live connections. All these are things that new technology help in. Whereas if you still try and do everything in Excel, you struggle. Um, so yeah, I think technology has helped a lot in this regard, in on both sides of the aisle, in terms of making things faster and then harder to react to, and also helping out on the technology side and to address that.
yeah. All right, folks, you heard it here first. Raphael is predicting the demise of Excel. I actually agree. Because
I've been
in the
saying it for about
day,
3 years.
you've been saying it for about 3 years. Okay, fine. You had this very batch approach to data. Like you'd have to wait to get your numbers in from that team or something, and they would take their time because they wanted to make sure everything was right. Otherwise, they'd get blamed for
Yeah,
mistakes or something.
for sure.
And you would be able to get what you needed, and there'd be this cascade of insights from different teams.
Mhm.
And leadership would always feel like they're piloting a container ship where you turn the wheel and about 8 minutes
6 hours
later the
later.
ship starts turning.
Yeah.
And the
Now
beyond
you need to
that,
be in a
like not
speedboat.
knowing exactly what's happening, not knowing can you trust the data,
Hmm.
how many fingers are in it. And I think that comes from an Excel first approach where people are touching the source of truth and transforming it and like getting their dirty little fingers on it from source to the next step. And
I
this
would
world
I
you
would
speak
almost say that
of,
that's, I mean, that is a problem. Version control is obviously a huge issue with Excel,
mhm,
but I would say that actually it's more in the to the Chinese whisper problem with Excel, where
ah,
someone will
yeah,
change
sure,
something and then someone else will receive it, and then they'll make their changes. And by the time it gets to the final recipient, it's gone through a million changes, and the first person who actually put in the real data, like that data has disappeared because someone's made some simplification somewhere along the way. And this is one
yeah,
of the
yeah,
great innovations with Google Sheets and the tool that I use, Causal, is that you share the live view with everyone. Everyone has access to the same model. So rather than the FP&A person team waiting for the data to come in from the various teams are putting the data directly into the model that the FP&A team is using. And so they got the live, accurate version immediately. So again, technology communication is what's making the evolution here. By the way, I just want to go back to the Excel is going to
yeah.
die forecast. I think there's always going to be a space for Excel. I think that because it's such a jack of all trades kind of tool,
Sure,
but
yeah,
I think that certain functions that it has today, that people use it for today, will die out as technology evolves, because better and more specific tools will come to be realized that can be replaced. I mean, they already exist. I mean, Causal is a prime example that is built to answer a lot of the challenges in Excel. And it's a
yeah,
fantastic modeling tool, not just for FP&A, but for lots of different other things. And obviously, it's a startup that just got acquired 2 weeks ago, but it's a relatively
really,
small tool, obviously compared to Excel. But there are more and more
yeah,
tools like this in the market, and the more they become well known and widely used, the more I think FP&A and other functions are going to shift towards that, because they become they're so much better for this kind of work. But it doesn't mean that Excel is going to die, because it's a quick and easy way of doing a quick and dirty and easy way of doing a lot of different things. But for
I
rigorous
keep trying to
modeling,
pin you down on like hot takes, and you keep
okay. So you see,
out.
the thing with forecasting is that it always has to be taken with a grain of salt, and it always has to be taken with a degree of uncertainty. This is what risk is all
Sure.
about. So I can say,
Yeah.
I think with 95% confidence that this is going to happen, but there is always uncertainty. And with something as big as Excel is going to die, no, I don't think it's going to completely die, but I think it's going to, like, there'll be parts of it that won't be used for certain activities over the long run, because better tools will come, or better tools will become better known for doing those things.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Since time immemorial, this is how it's worked for people.
Yeah.
So I wanna say something back to you that I think I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like this old way of FP&A where the data is transformed and enriched each step along the way, you have to wait for the previous step to happen, and there's this game of telephone or whisper where the meaning can change.
Yeah.
You have one set of data for everybody, and different teams can transform it, but they're not transforming the data.
No,
they're not transforming systematic.
They're adding to the data. They're not transforming to the data. And more importantly, they're not transforming the model that's using the data.
Right. Well, they're building models on top of the data, such that if the data changes, the answers change. Because they're not mucking with the numbers, they're just building systems to transform those numbers into insights.
Are we talking about...
How does that feel to you?
Well, I'm not sure I completely followed the logic. Are we saying that an FP&A team builds a model for the sort of a holistic model of the business, and then different teams have access to the data, but then those different teams are also building their own parts of the FP&A, the holistic model? Or are we saying they're building separate add-ons or completely standalone models?
I guess a little bit of both. And I guess where I'm going is it's kind of the democratization of data insights.
So
some of these functions are coming out of the ivory tower.
Right. So I would say that it would probably not be necessarily wise to have every team building parts of the holistic business model.
Sure.
Because a model at the end of the day is a tool for certain things. And a holistic business model, the goal of it is to build, the goal should be, I think, to build sort of some way of translating top-down strategic decision-making into operational goals, so that the operations can actually sort of act out on management strategy. And if every team is building their kernel of that model, then one is obviously, so the obvious thing is that they might not have the expertise to build the models correctly. You essentially have to have an FP&A person in each team to be able to, because not every team, I wouldn't trust a marketing team, someone in the marketing team to build a part of the FP&A model, for example. They wouldn't have the expertise to be able to do it. Also, they wouldn't have the drive, they wouldn't have the motivations, and their goals might not be aligned with the top-down strategy.
Maybe this is next month's topic. I differ. I think the best organizations are embracing metrics and data within every team.
No, I'm not saying the contrary. I'm saying that the responsibility of building the model should not be with every team. I think that the FP&A team should be working in conjunction with every team to understand what they need, what KPIs and metrics they need to be able to better do their job and understand their performance and manage their teams better. But the FP&A team should still be building the model, because that's their expertise. Sure. And if you take that and spread it out to everyone else, then you're going to have different people controlling different parts of the model, which means that no one else is going to really understand what's going on in those models. And the goal is not for everyone to own their part of the model. It's for the FP&A team to be able to do their job, which is to communicate to management what they need to understand about the business to be able to inform their strategy.
Sure.
It's kind of, I think we were talking about this also in the past about bottlenecking. And if you have everyone owning parts of the model, then there is no bottle. I mean, there is a bottleneck, but the bottleneck is all over the place essentially, rather than creating one sort of source of truth that is understood by one team and that can communicate it to everyone else. The other team should be feeding that model with the data that then can be used. But if they're owning the model as well, then the FP&A team won't be able to translate it into vision, into messaging, into communicate it effectively.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion on this. Obviously, everyone can have their own opinion.
We might get back to that topic.
Mm-hmm.
Make it okay. So we have a new, faster way of doing financial planning and analysis, and ultimately, because money is the blood of a business, financial planning is almost entirely business planning. Like it's what resources you have and where do you put them for what you want to get. And so we're speeding up those decisions. We are probably improving the integrity of our data sources because people aren't handing Excel files around to each other. It sounds like a brave new world.
It is.
How, like, say I'm a poor lowly analyst. Newly arrived into an FP&A team. And all the rest of them are crusty old codgers, and they still pass their Excels back and forth on the shared drive.
Sure.
What's the easy step towards this utopian future for me?
I think already if you can convince them to use Google Sheets, it's a good start. I mean, you laugh, but like obviously a lot. Actually, no, Excel. You can you sort of have multiple people changing Excel these days on 365?
Yes.
I can't remember.
Yes.
Oh, you can.
You can.
Okay, so no, then that's irrelevant. I was basically going to make the point that if you put the model in an environment where everyone can work on the same model simultaneously, rather than having a million different versions of the same model, that's already a good first step. Because
I would still say that applies then.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's going to force people to communicate more and sort of work together more rather than sort of I make a change, I save it, I put it on the drive, and then someone else picks it up. And then someone else will be like, oh, but I was just working on it, so do we call it version 1.1 or 1.1b or 1. Whatever? So if everyone is working on the same...
behind it.
So already if you're working in a collaborative environment, you're already moving in the right direction.
I like it.
And then afterwards, I guess... I mean, eventually the idea is to move away from an Excel, Google Sheet world where you can, because you want to sort of, it depends obviously also on what kind of technology you're using. If you're, I don't know, using QuickBooks or Xero or, I don't know, Bamboo or Sage or whatever, any of these sort of software platforms to do any of your activities, whether that's bookkeeping and accounting to HR management to, I don't know, your sort of marketing spend or planning or whatever, being able to sort of directly integrate those into your models rather than have to create some kind of CSV export and upload it into the model on a periodic basis is going to be immensely powerful. And you can't do that in Excel or Google Sheets. So then that means that you need to move away to a specialized FP&A tool. But that's probably a couple of steps down the way.
I have good news for you, Raphael. I think in the days since you stopped using Excel so dang much, it has grown in those ways. So it is multi-user. concurrent, everybody's on the same page. But
Okay, well, that's good.
further, it has really moved and encouraged people to stop thinking of the data as being like what they're creating, but the transformations as being what they create. So you can very easily put a new set of data on the front end and still reuse all those transformations to get the answers you want with almost no effort.
Okay.
So the past way of doing it, like you use formulas in the rows and the cells, and you drag them down and stuff. There is a new, very fancy query editor in Excel where you can point it at different data sources. You can point it at Google Sheets. You can point it at other Excel files. You can point it at databases. You can point it at almost anything. And you can use this query language to mix and match it all sorts of fancy ways. You can, and it's the same one in Power BI that the Power BI uses.
Yeah.
And that allows you to point straight at the data and have your little Excel sheet do some very fancy and very resilient data transformations, but without too much extra training.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, don't get me wrong; those are not my main issues with Excel anyway. But I don't want to go on a rant about Excel on this call. But those are just two examples off the top of my head. But it's good to know that Excel is moving with the times.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean that's good to know. I mean, I knew there were innovations in Excel, and I still use Excel periodically, but I can model 10 times faster in Causal than in Excel. I mean, literally, I've done the same model twice, so it takes me 10 times as long in Excel.
I will say Monte Carlo is definitely easier in Causal than it is in Excel.
Yeah, and I use that extensively now. Like quantitative risk analysis is a very exciting place for me. And I'm doing quite a bit of work in that space. So yeah, just for that, Causal is fantastic.
The other nice thing about I would say, I'm going to answer my own question. So I would absolutely agree. You're going to start your team's journey into this new future of faster planning, faster FP&A. And the first step is getting everybody on the same page, on the same data set. And then get them to start building data transformations instead of moving values around. And there's, I mean, hats off to the Excel team. It's pretty amazing. I would say you get a lot.
When you say transformations, when you say transformations, you're talking about sort of pivot tables and stuff like that, where you're doing simple calculations to move things.
No, it goes deep, man.
Okay.
I don't think we have time to cover it, but they have
I was just curious.
A pretty robust query language that you can combine data sets, big data sets, look up, merge.
So this is what I was talking about with big data. That's
essentially. This is exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So this is for me a step away from what FP&A should be. No, really, because it's more about pattern recognition, translating and transformation of data rather than using the data to create insights using business knowledge and experience. And trying to work with decision makers to understand what their pain points are, what their aspirations are, because there is a very human element. You can't genericize and you can't automate insights, modeling insights. I mean, some of it can. Some things are standard, but not everything is standard. And I think that there's a human level which big data sort of can't address because it's not built to address that kind of thing. that you can only do through formulaic modeling rather than
Huh.
transformations and manipulations.
Okay.
So that's what I was getting at. That's more where my world is.
Yeah. Right.
Like, for example,
I think that'll
go on.
get people started, and then any other advice? Any other for people starting this journey, or maybe continuing it from where it's at?
I think just talking to again, it comes back to the communication and interrelations between the different departments. If you talk to the other teams and understand what they do and what they need and what their pain points are, you can start addressing them. If you stay in a silo, if you stay within your FP&A team without talking to anyone outside that team about what their needs are, then you're not really doing your job, essentially.
Right.
And it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, you mentioned at one point of people having different definitions for different things. I think it sort of gave me almost PTSD about a project I did years and years ago, where it's a huge company. It was a national sized logistics organization for a mining conglomerate, and he had the accounting team, the finance team, and the engineer or the operations team that were sitting literally. Each office was down the corridor from each other, like literally one door, next door, third door, and none of them ever spoke to each other, and all three of them had not radically, but sort of significant enough differences in how they were defining the lifetime of their sort of wagons. So there's logistics companies that are moving wagons around the country, shifting ore, like mineral ore and stuff like that. And they had different definitions, which made sense for each individual team. Sort of accounting was about when money came in or money went out. Actually, when they bought the wagons, to money coming in when they sold it. Finance was about when they actually the purchase date of when they and the sale date of when they bought and sold the wagons, and the operations team was when the wagon was actually on the rail and when it was taken off, irrespective of whether it was sitting in a junkyard for a while. So they all had very different definitions of what the wagon lifetime was, and so they all had vastly different numbers for how big their fleet of rail cars were. And then you try to build a holistic model that's telling the executives, where do you need to spend your money in terms of investing? Are you investing in new wagons? Are you investing in refurbishing your existing wagons? Are you renting wagons because you need sort of rapid demand to meet demand? And there was no visibility because every department that we spoke to gave us different data. So communication,
all right,
definitions between
talk to each other, folks.
Exactly. So it's like and even if you have, like, for an operational perspective or whatever, you have different definitions for your bookkeeping or your operations, whatever, but at least have a holistic view of the business where everyone agrees on what, like, one set of truth, whichever one that is, from a practical perspective, which one is the most important for decision making.
That is the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
I basically just locked them in a room and wouldn't let them leave until they agreed on it.
Good. It might work.
It did work.
Well, all right. Success story.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks. This has been fun. Raphael, I learned some stuff. I learned some new words for ideas that I've been kind of thinking about for a while.
Mm-hmm. I learned about new things in Excel. So thank you.
Yeah, right. If you have questions about resiliency, risk modeling in the accounting world and the finance world, that's what we get up to. Please hit us up. We'd love to get in touch with you. Last words, Raphael?
No, I mean, just it was a great conversation. We touched on things that I wasn't expecting to on this call. It's always fun to have these conversations because we go on interesting tangents and sort of learn new things about different aspects of the world. If anyone wants to sort of hit me up and ask questions about sort of risk modeling, resilience, forecasting, or causal. Happy to have a conversation anytime. Yeah, happy to help.
All right. Have a great week, folks.
Yeah, take care, everyone.